Hi folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from John Mayer, titled Paradise Valley. But first, a confession. I don't like John Mayer. I never really have, to be honest. Even since the beginning with the succession of critically acclaimed albums, I've never really been a fan of the guy in any way, shape, or form. You know, if I was being generous, I'd argue he's written maybe 2 songs that I like. 3 if I was really pushing it. Now wait, before the majority of you jump down my throat and just call me a troll who doesn't know what I'm talking about, let me explain this, because believe it or not, I do have a rationale for my dislike here. For starters, John Mayer has never really impressed me as a vocalist, particularly in his range. He sounds very much like he's trying to imitate a softer post-grunge vocal technique, which I'll admit has never worked for me. In comparison with most artists, he actually sounds better in his louder, higher range, when he's actually able to bring some energy to the table. Unfortunately, he rarely goes into this range, which leads to my second big problem with the guy. Most of his music is mind-blowingly tedious. I've admitted a number of times that white guys with acoustic guitars just aren't my thing, and John Mayer is one of the biggest reasons why. While he's not a terrible guitarist, he's not exactly a virtuoso here either, and thus, all too often, the melody lines of his songs sound very formulaic and similar to each other, which can make his albums get really boring really fast. This isn't helped by the fact that he's so limited his range thanks to his vocal delivery. His songs don't tend to modulate or grow or reach any sort of climax outside of a certain range of quiet reserve. But on top of all that, Mayer's hoarse delivery doesn't seem to lend itself very well to truly emotionally evocative songs. Now, I'll admit this might be a personal pet peeve, and I realize that most of you might not share it, but to me there's always seems to be a certain lack of intimacy in his music. There always seems to be this certain guarded nature around Mayer that never really seems to expose any vulnerability, which immediately throws me off in romantic songs because it doesn't feel real. Place this in comparison with that sappy song from 2008, Hey There Delilah by the Plain White T's. Now, I'll admit right out of the gate that that song is clumsy, poorly written, and amateurishly performed, but yet it still manages to work for me better than the majority of John Mayer's discography because it feels genuine and real. Emotions that I just have a hard time finding in Mayer's work. Eventually, though, it all comes back to the songwriting. And I'll admit, without shame, that John Mayer is a much better songwriter than Jack Johnson or Jason Mraz. As I've said, John Mayer has at least written a few songs that I like, but he's also written a whole ton of crap that doesn't hold up nearly as well. Part of the problem is that there seems to be a very serious lack of humor or wit, not that anybody's told him that, as John Mayer delivers all of his songs with as much somber earnestness as his voice can allow. And I'll admit, at points it kind of works, and I'll completely understand why so many people have fallen for this guy over the past decade. People respond well to this sort of thing. Hell, in most cases, I respond well to this sort of thing. But here's my sticking point. I don't buy John Mayer's sincerity in the slightest. Too often in his songs, he just paints himself as this sad sack loser who's just looking to serenade a girl with his guitar and oh so clever songwriting. And really, that starts to come across as more than a little disingenuous when you discover that he's dated, Jennifer Love Hewitt, Jessica Simpson, Minka Kelly, Jennifer Aniston, Taylor Swift, and now Katy Perry. And then coupled with that infamous Playboy interview in 2010 and the scathing direct assault Taylor Swift launched with Dear John, it's hard to believe Mayer's attempts to sound romantic anymore. And yes, I will agree that Mayer is a better technical songwriter than Taylor Swift. Well, occasionally he is. But Dear John at least sounds emotionally authentic and does a fairly apt job at describing who John Mayer really is behind the artifice and the mask. All this comes together to paint an interesting, if really unappealing, picture of John Mayer, reminiscent of that douchebag you meet in college who woos girls by strumming on his acoustic guitar. And sure, I understand that's not the image he's trying to put forward of himself when he presents his material, but it's the same problem I have with Chris Brown. I have a really hard time separating the artist persona from the public persona in my mind, mostly because elements of said art, in the lyrics or in the presentation, only seem to reinforce that image or are drawn upon that image. But all that being said, I do appreciate that John Mayer is at least trying to repair his image. I'll admit that his previous album, Born and Raised, is a little bit too self-aggrandizing for me, but maybe that was just a necessary transitory step. And hell, I've been surprised by acoustic acts earlier this year, so maybe I'll get lucky twice. So, how does John Mayer's new album, Paradise Valley, turn out? Okay, I'm going to try as hard as I can not to dwell on my own personal pet peeves related to John Mayer and try to review it just on the merits of his songwriting and his music. Forget my dislike for the fact that he doesn't seem to care at all about his delivery on this album and barely seems to be trying in the slightest. No. I'm just going to be focusing on the instrumentation, production, and songwriting. That's it. That's all I'm going to be looking at. That's for his fans. I'm doing this for you. Well, if I'm going to be bluntly honest, I'm not all that impressed by the instrumentation or production at all, particularly considering that Mayer seems to be moving towards a twangier, more country folk direction in his music in comparison with the acoustic singer-songwriter material of his earlier career, a path he already started on Born and Raised. Now, this could be a very good path for him. That was one of the elements of Born and Raised I really did like. And I'll give him this, most of his hooks are competent enough. I don't think I'll ever be a fan of Mayer as a guitarist, but he doesn't embarrass himself here, and there's a bit more instrumental diversity. Unfortunately, we tend to lose a lot of that instrumental texture during the production. None of the guitar or piano or other instruments really pop or develop any flavor, and the watered-down saxophone on the opening guitar Wildfire was a real disappointment. In this case, I wouldn't even call this Mayer's fault, because he's clearly trying to bring some energy across in his instrumentation, at least in some tracks, and his production is just completely handicapping that. But of course, I get the reason why the production was done this way, to place 100% of the audience's attention on John Mayer's songwriting. After all, if you minimalize or de-emphasize elements of art, you're deliberately doing so to draw attention to something else deemed more important, in this case, John Mayer himself. So in a bit of change of pace, what I'm going to do is go through each song on John Mayer's Paradise Valley and only talk about the songwriting. Number 1. Wildfire. Well, this is a very typical summer song, very much in the country tradition. Basically, Mayer is trying to serenade the girl in question by saying that this summer could lead to everlasting love, playing off of their natural chemistry described as a wildfire. Okay, that's decent enough. But hang on, hasn't it been the point of summer love songs that love in this season is wild, passionate, and short? Hell, I think Mayer himself even uses this. Also, does it make nobody else uncomfortable that he uses the line, "I got a rock from the river in my medicine bag, magpie feather in his medicine bag"? Putting aside cultural sensitivities here, magpies are traditionally birds known for stealing, so if the magpie feather was left in his medicine bag, so is Mayer looking to imply that he stole somebody's girlfriend? If not, why are these lines in the song? 2. Dear Marie. A song harkening back to that high school crush that he still has a thing for, even though she does now have a family. Okay, that can be a tragic situation. So why are there lines like, "From time to time, I'll go looking for your photograph online"? Look, I know we live in the age of Facebook stalking, but doesn't this read as a little creepy to you? Considering this girl and Mayer appear to have had some sort of thing back when they were 15? Shouldn't he have moved on by now? Number 3. Waiting on the Day. Okay, basic song talking about how John Mayer is waiting for a certain woman to come back into his life when they become older. And then there's this line. When that voice comes to say that it's not wrong what you did for just a kid. Okay, so let me get this straight. John Mayer was apparently used by some woman for a pregnancy, and he's convinced that at some point in his life, he'll consider that a good thing, and they'll settle down together? How, outside of the most hackneyed romantic comedies, is that anywhere close to actually believable or sane? Number 4. Paper Doll. The song reportedly directed as a response to Taylor Swift's Dear John, and it basically plays out as Mayer appropriating insults that Taylor slung at him to throw right back at her, plus more, accusing her of shallowness, materialism, vapidity, a false image of purity, and the fact that there will always be somebody there to help her when she stumbles. Now, putting aside whether or not I may or may not agree with these various attacks, I will admit that the song is admittedly better paced than Dear John. That song tended to drag a little bit. But I do question why this song even exists. Dude, have some class and dignity. Nobody would remember Dear John in a few years if you had just ignored it. If Mayer was looking to come across as mature, he definitely blows it here. Number 5. Call Me the Breeze, a country road song where John Mayer just keeps on moving on, wherever the wind might take him. It's kind of a bit like a watered-down, sexless version of the old 1961 classic The Wanderer by Dion, and as such, it doesn't really bother me all that much. Number 6. Who You Love. The love song featuring Katy Perry. You know, I'll actually give props for the improvement to Katy Perry's delivery, but if we're looking for a dopier, shallower love song, I'd be hard-pressed to find one. The lyrics say, "You love who you love. For a chorus, it's a circular statement and an awfully meaningless one at that. Also, maybe it's just me, but I find it a little bit awkward that Perry seems to be defending Mayer on this track with lines like, "Some have said that his heart is too hot to hold," which, in comparison to Mayer's sad sack loser persona, seems to run directly against that, at least from my point of view. Number 7. "I will be found lost at sea." It's really not a swashbuckling pirate song, if that's what you're thinking, but instead a hopeful plea using the metaphors of being lost and knowing that someday a girl will find him. You know, the song guaranteed to be appropriated across college campuses as the faux sensitive drivel that alternates between pitying and self-aggrandizing using some of the most overused metaphors in the goddamn book. Something could have been made out of this, really, if the songwriting wasn't so incredibly basic and borderline juvenile, and seriously, if you're not in the 1950s and you're using the word birdie, rethink your job as a songwriter. Song number 8. Wildfire Interlude. This little bit was written and delivered by Frank Ocean with Mayer on guitar and is unsurprisingly the best song on the album. Full of lush description and superb delivery that paints a far more interesting and descriptive picture than anything else on the album. Really serious shame that it only lasts a minute and a half though. At least Jay-Z on Magna Carta Holy Grail gave him a couple minutes to actually get his point across. Number 9. You're no one till someone lets you down. Oh look, a bro anthem to a friend who has been dumped, sung by the best friend who seems content to crap all over the girl and inform his friend that he was no one until someone lets you down. Okay, take a pause for a second. First of all, I get the sentiment, but still a terrible way to frame it, particularly when you're talking to a friend. And number 2, what are you insinuating here, Mayer? That people in stable, sane, loving relationships aren't worth anything? With lines like, "There's so much to adore in a heart that's blue." Are you implying that misery is actually attractive? Because speaking from experience, the whole tortured soul thing might be kind of superficially attractive for a time, but it wears out its welcome really, really fast. Ask Morrissey about how that works. Number 10, Badge and Gun. I'm sorry, are you kidding me? Is John Mayer really trying to sound like a tough guy, soldiering on out into the cold to reclaim his career and his purpose, and doing so through police metaphors delivered with complete country seriousness? Okay, Mayer, you're not a policeman, your music isn't a public service, and you might just be one of the wimpiest singer-songwriters who have ever performed. There's no way in hell that this was going to sound remotely convincing to anyone. Number 11. On the Way Home, a song that concludes the album and implies that fleeting summer romance has ended. Wait a minute, doesn't that fly completely in the face of the theme of the very first song on this album? But seriously, though I think the lyrics are pretty basic, this is easily the second best song on the album, mostly because it's got a lot of energy and some witty and heartfelt songwriting. Although, one major problem, Mayer, the second you imply that a relationship / sex with you is a little bit of heaven, I find it extremely hard to buy into anything you say. So there you have it, folks. Every single song. And I think I gave all 11 more than a fair shot. And as I said, there were more than a few that were genuinely good, or at least a couple that I couldn't have any real issues with. But all that being said, all of my previous complaints are still more than valid. Look, I get why people like John Mayer, I really do, but here's the point that has to be made. As with most people, it's nearly impossible for me to separate John Mayer the man from John Mayer the artist, particularly when there are bits included in his songs that directly address said events and people from his past. To ignore artistic intent and the reasons behind why he wrote these songs go against everything I stand for as a critic, and I'm sick of dancing around this issue. So, to bring this to a swift conclusion, John Mayer's Paradise Valley is a flat, vapid, sloppily written album delivered with little to no energy and passion. Putting aside John Mayer's status as a contemptible human being, this album lacks ambition and feels utterly inessential. Look, I don't buy into John Mayer's emotional authenticity because he lacks the emotive range to deliver it effectively, and his lyrics toe the line between blandly simplistic and very, very questionable. And even by the low standards I hold John Mayer, this is not a good album. In fact, it kind of sucks. In fact, it really kind of sucks. Skip it. Well, if you'd like to like and subscribe, I have more videos coming up on the way. See you next time.